right. This is great. Cool. So thank you so much for everyone who's answering that and putting in those details. Yeah, so I'm really excited today. We have a really great panel of teachers. I have some questions prepared for them. And then after that, I'll also leave time for people to ask questions as well. So a couple of just things before we get started and I should introduce myself. I'm Jack Replinger. I taught high school physics in Memphis, Tennessee, mostly at Title I schools, and I taught some AP and also regular and lower level classes. Um, and I created a website called Positive Physics, which is how I met all of these teachers. But this is supposed to be useful for you, whether you use positive physics in your class or not. At the end, I'm happy to give people a quick tour of positive physics if they're not familiar with it, but we'll definitely leave that to the very end. So first thing, if you have any questions, we have a good turnout. So we've got 5 panelists and about 20 participants. So if you have any questions kind of at the start, if you don't mind just asking those in the chat, I think that would be super helpful. Also, if you want to get a certificate of attendance, if you want to be able to turn that into your school for PD hours, I can stick around at the end and I'll take down your names and emails and we can get that set up as well. So I have a few questions that I asked for the panelists, thanks to people who put in some questions when they were filling out the survey. And then I have I'll leave some time for questions from the audience, and then happy to give people a tour of positive physics if they want to stick around. But yeah, first, let me kind of introduce the panelists. So first, we have Veronica, and actually I'll let each person kind of say where they are and what they teach. So
Okay.
Veronica, yeah, please introduce yourself.
Veronica Ellingson. I've been teaching physics in Hudson, Wisconsin for 26 years. I teach AP Physics 1, AP Physics C Mechanics, and regular physics and E&M independent study.
Gotcha. One thing Veronica didn't mention, she's also been an AP grader and even helped write, I think, even the most recent Southern AP test.
So I'm on the development committee for AP Physics 1. And so, yes, in April, wrote the 2024 exam and the multiple choice, but I forgot it. It's erased.
Perfect. And then Erica, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, I'm Erica Hedegaard, and I teach in Washington State at Olympia High School. And I've taught this is my 32nd year, but only my 3rd year doing AP because I switched schools. But I'm doing AP Physics 1, and it's also a dual enrollment, so students can get credit through Central Washington University.
Awesome. Thanks, Erica. And Andreas.
Hi, I'm Andreas Diamonides. I teach in Naperville, Illinois, Naperville Central. I used to teach in St. Charles last year. I have been teaching AP1 for 9 years now, and just started teaching AP2 this year.
Thank you. And then Enrique.
Hi guys, my name is Enrique Chi. This is my 34th year teaching physics. I'm currently teaching physics, AP Physics C Mechanics. And I'm teaching at Bainbridge Island in Washington State also.
And I have to add that the way that I know Enrique is he was my high school physics teacher. And then lastly, Lauren.
Hi, I'm Lauren Savage. I teach at Mountain House High School in Mountain House, California, outside of San Francisco. This is my 9th year teaching and my 4th year teaching AP Physics C Mechanics year long. I also teach honors physics, and those students have the option to take the AP Physics 1 exam at the end of the year.
Cool. So yeah, we're just going to dive into our questions then, and then all panelists, just whoever wants to take start on the first one, I'll just let you go, and then yeah, if anyone else wants to add to it, please go ahead. So a first question that I've gotten a lot is, how do you handle pacing in your class? So yeah, I know when I first started teaching AP Physics, I spent way too much time on mechanics and left very little room for all the topics at the end. So yeah, how do you handle pacing in your AP class? And I'll let anybody jump in.
All right,
Okay.
I'll jump.
Oh, you go.
Okay, so with AP Physics C, Positive Physics really did a good job in terms of going by subject area. So it probably matches the AP Physics C curriculum 95% in terms of pacing. So if you are teaching an AP Physics class, you can look at the College Board and you can break down that into your year long. So what you have, Jack, broken up for what you call like semester one is pretty much a match with mine. So I think the pacing is pretty straightforward. You take 20 weeks per semester. You have, I believe, 10 subjects. So about 2 weeks approximately per topic.
Gotcha. And how long do you leave at the end for reviewing?
So I probably leave about 3 weeks, 4 weeks for review.
Okay. Gotcha.
And I'm using positive physics up to end of March, and then we migrate over to the College Board website, and that's how I use it.
Gotcha. Lauren, did you want to add anything about since you also are on since you also teach AP Physics C mechanics?
I kind of pace it by the College Board's lessons about a week or two, depending on the content, per each one of their lessons. I haven't been able to integrate positive physics as much into AP Physics and mechanics, but I was able to do a really nice calculus refresher for my students at the beginning of the year using the self-created content in positive physics, and I like that a lot.
Gotcha. And then, yeah, did anybody else want to add on, especially about like maybe how you do pacing in AP Physics 1?
I would say AP Physics 1, I take the 7 units and make them 9. So I actually so imagine I do 3 weeks for each of the 9 units, meaning that I break kinematics into linear motion and projectile motion. And then at the end of the year, we have rotational motion into rotational kinematics and torque. And then I do another unit on rotational kinetic energy and angular momentum. So it's not perfect. I mean, obviously some units are longer than others, but it's kind of like a 3-week deal. You know, our quarters are 3 weeks. So it's kind of nice to, and then have like 3 weeks to review. We'll see how that goes, but that's kind of the plan and usually is the plan.
Gotcha. Any other thoughts on pacing?
Yeah, I tend to front load a lot. So like my first unit takes a really, really long time. And that's because I'm doing stuff like practicing linearization, practicing the graphing component of stuff, practicing the lab skills, practicing proportional reasoning, like introducing that stuff. And I like just kind of have in the back of my mind that it's gonna be okay at the at the end of the year, because basically I just try to get through energy by the end of the year, like by December 31st or whatever your first semester ends. If I can get through energy, I know I'm fine. I also don't leave a lot of time at the end for review because I kind of work up until like 2 weeks before, if that. Like rotation is just everything we just did, but spinning, and that's what I tell them. And so like we're reviewing technically, like the graphs never go away, nothing ever goes away. And so building all that stuff in and knowing that it's built into everything, whether they're graphing energy in simple harmonic motion, and they call those energy questions anyway, even though it's a simple harmonic motion question technically. But like so it's all there most of the time. And like something like the energy unit, it's really just like 2 things. And then it's how many different contexts can we add in here to figure this stuff out at the end of the day. And if they can build those basic skills, so like pacing those basic skills at the beginning and making sure that they're laying everything out and using the LOL charts and stuff like that, building that foundation is kind of the key thing there.
Gotcha. Erica, anything to add to that?
I was just gonna say I do the same thing that Andreas just said. I take a little bit longer at the beginning, you know, to set the tone in the class and understand what it is that we're doing, and then kind of steamroll as we go further down. I try to get energy done by the first semester as well. And then in second semester, I try to do a little bit more with review of multiple choice questions and continue to add free response questions in there as well. And I use positive physical a lot, primarily is because, you know, my kids, they can choose to take the AP test or they can choose to do credit. So, you know, I'm looking at two different things, but everybody does the same thing in the classroom, regardless of what they choose to do. So trying to hit both of those types of things.
Gotcha. We had a question in the chat. Benjamin asked, how many instructional hours do you have per week? If you don't mind sharing.
Mine is 54 minutes per day. We do have Wednesdays a little shorter and Fridays a little shorter, but we're on a traditional 6-period day.
5 hours per week for me.
Yeah, 5 periods. They range from 50 minutes to 42 minutes, depending on the day.
I have 3 48-minute periods and then 1 block 80-minute.
Gotcha.
So just under 4 hours a week.
Got it. Got it. Okay, cool. Yeah, so then I was going to ask and I'm going to ask you kind of the next question, kind of how you structure your class, but just out of curiosity, if you were a new teacher and you were looking at resources, you don't have to say positive physics. What resources do you use in your class?
So I'll start. Jack came to me about 10 years ago with positive physics. I looked at it and then I just shoved it to the side. I said, yeah, I'm kind of been doing this, stuck in my old ways. Prior to the pandemic, I started looking at PP very closely. And since the pandemic, I'm telling you, whether you're first year, 5th year, 10th year, on my 30th year, this is probably my last year, it's a no-brainer. You would think I'm getting some money kicked back from Jack, but I'm not. Do it. Do positive physics. It makes life easy. It simplifies it. It's outlined for you. If you're a new teacher, it gives you a wonderful outline. Now Jack has offered the ability to modify the question. So if you don't like certain wording of the question, like my hang up is when you take the word speed and you make it into a verb, speeding. So those kind of things that Jack, I mentioned to you, you can easily modify. So it's a no-brainer. Do it, whether you're doing AP Physics 1, AP Physics 2, AP Physics C Mechanics, or AP Physics C and E&M. It's a no-brainer. Other resources, because of the pandemic, we kicked into the Pivot Lab, which is online digital labs. It's what we use occasionally, but I wouldn't use Mastery Physics anymore. If you do College Board, I would then migrate over, as I said before, to the College Board curriculum in the March and April. My criticism with College Board is if you just go to kinematics and you look at the questions, a lot of assumptions are made. There's no way students can answer those pre-response question or multiple choice questions without having a more general exposure to kinematics. So that's why I don't even touch the College Board site until semester 2. Wow. Even the videos, a lot of assumptions are made in those videos, and because I think it does a disservice if you start showing those videos and you start with kinematics 1 in College Board. I would start with basic. It's all about understanding the concepts. And I think in PP, we address the concept first. And I think if you do this for a while, you recognize concept is more important. You get the concept, you can answer any question as challenging as it may be. All right, that's enough of my soap opera, and I'll take that $100 Jack that you promised me.
Yeah, I think in order to kind of build all the skills that they need to do well on the AP test, and I guess I do focus a lot on doing well on the AP test. I know that sometimes some teachers are like, well, as long as they love physics and do a good job, which I have a tough time like quantifying. So I'm just like, how do they do on the AP test? So, like, I do use Pivot a lot, which I should also have a disclaimer that I work as a contractor writing content for Pivot this summer. So I'm biased because I think that the stuff that I wrote is good, but and the stuff that Pivot wrote is good. In terms of the ability for students to get used to like gathering important pieces of data and the way that Pivot has started to structure questions and the writing component that they require on the free response questions, you do need something like Pivot to help you kind of help them practice a lot of the different styles of questions that they're going to encounter. they've done a good job recently adding questions where it's like student one says this, or like, hey, what are some sources of error, and get them away from saying like human error is something that I'm just like, if I see those words, I don't even read anything else because that's not even a thing. So, but things like so pivot definitely helps with the writing. Yeah, positive physics is the other thing. It builds up those basic skills, and I agree that it's tough to get to those AP classroom questions without knowing where they are in their basic skill set, like ability level. And even if it's a proportional reasoning question, the AP classroom style questions with proportional reasoning just make things, they amp it up, right? They take it up a notch. So knowing that they have some practice on just a basic multiple choice question where it's like, hey, if you doubled this value, what happened to the stopping distance? And they don't do something crazy with the scenario. They don't do something crazy with the surface. They're like making sure that they can answer those questions. And I think that's something that teachers skip a lot is, did you make sure they can just like do that simple thing first and not just go right to AP classroom, because they got no chance. Like if they can't do the basic thing first. So I think someone in the AP teacher Facebook group posted a meme of like SpongeBob getting stronger that one of their physics students made, where it was like the different levels of SpongeBob muscle building. And
Yeah, I posted it.
oh, okay, that was
Yeah.
so
No,
funny,
I
but it was
didn't post it.
perfect.
I didn't post it, but I saw it. Like I
Okay, yeah,
posted
it
it
was
for my
perfect
students.
to describe kind of what you need to help students build. And some kids come to your class looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but some don't. And how are you going to help them get to that point? Because if you throw a 400-pound barbell at them, it's not going to be a fun time. And you have to have something that gets them the skill set that they need.
Gotcha. Maybe, yeah, Erica, if you want,
Yeah.
any other resources that you use?
No, I was just gonna say that, yeah, I agree with everybody else. I don't really start those questions in AP Classroom until second semester because they struggle with that. I really like, obviously I use positive physics, but I really like the multiple choice challenge questions that you put in there, I think last year, that kind of have some of that proportional reasoning. I like the physics classroom as well, because the great thing about both of those things is you can give those to them as homework or assignments, and they get instant feedback. They don't have to wait for me to grade something or do something. They get instant feedback from those. And I do like the workbook though that the AP Classroom created. For kind of starting looking at the FRQ types of questions.
Gotcha. And then maybe Lauren, if you don't mind if I put you on the spot for resources.
You're good. So for my honors class, again, those kids often take the AP Physics 1 exam. I use Physics Classroom and Positive Physics as my main source of content throughout the year. And then Flipping Physics is a great resource for content as far as lectures go. We're one-to-one with Chromebooks, have a blended learning style where we try not to lecture too much in the classroom. So I refer them to a lot of those videos. And then for my AP class, I really love Pivot. I do WebAssigns, Positive Physics for some review content, AP Classroom questions, old AP tests. I'm sure we all use those. And then again, Flipping Physics is amazing.
And there was a question in the chat, I think mainly for Erica. Do you recommend using the AP Physics workbook from the start, or is that something that you do later in the year, second semester?
No, I start that during first semester. I start introducing and putting those in there because I get a lot of kids asking, you know, well, what's going to look like on the AP test? What is it? And I'm like, well, we don't really have enough content yet to pull some of the ones that were on the test last year. So I do use those, the workbook a little bit, starting a little bit earlier.
Got it. Great.
And the workbook does a good job of like honing in on one argumentation skill, or like focusing. It's not like A through H like sometimes the FRQs are. And so it's like, okay, now it's just a derivation question, or now it's just can you explain why this person's right or wrong? And so it's not as overwhelming as some of the FRQs can get to. So it's easier to use from the get than like the question bank on AP Classroom. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Awesome. Yeah, so the next thing I was going to ask is, what does a typical week look like in your class? Mostly kind of just like, can you give us an idea for how your week is structured? What do you do for homework, for labs, for assessments? Thoughts on that? Maybe I'll start by putting Andreas on the spot, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so most of my labs in class I don't actually grade. Just because it's hard for me to get a sense of who actually knows what they're doing, type of thing. So this next week, I'm going to start the week by doing a free fall lab where they practice with the video analysis on pivot. We practice just dropping a ball, and then we like go through, okay, here's how you plot, and here's how you track the motion of this object. Here's how you make the position time graph. Here's the velocity time graph. And then with the lab, I'll kind of take it to a new step, and I'll say, okay, what I'm actually going to grade now is your ability to do that same type of process, but with a ball flying up in the air and analyzing some of the motion with that. And so that's where like a lab grade would come from. Just so everybody makes their own video, everybody submits their own analysis questions. And I don't do like a lab report or anything like that. It's like, hey, what does it mean when the velocity graph started up here now instead of 0? Like, what does that mean to you? Why is that what happened in this one and not on the one we did yesterday? Those type of questions, where it just focuses in on some things that they can explain. So for labs, that's kind of how I try to actually kind of start chunks of units with labs like that, where it's, hey, let's learn the rules with a lab, so you know kind of what we're talking about, and then we'll move on to practice problems with free fall. And then I get into like, okay, now we know the concepts, we can do a positive physics section with just vocab and concepts, and the maybe like one of the multiple choice questions or something like that. Then we'll go on to actually like solving problems with complete problems 1, where they're just dropping. Then we'll go into, hey, let's throw things up, and they come back down. We'll do some more in-class activities where it's like, okay, now that we know how to solve these problems, calculate your reaction time if you just drop a meter stick, those type of activities in class. But the homework is typically, okay, now we practice this skill, go do it yourself on positive physics. You all got random numbers, you all got different scenario, or you got unique scenarios, not unique scenarios, but different numbers, and you got a section that's focusing right on this skill specifically. And so that's where the homework is going to come from. And then the assessments are a combination of kind of AP style. I do throw like just some still where it's like, do you know, like, have you been breathing in this room this whole entire time at least? And we'll give you some freebies here, not like the AP test where it's just like battle after battle on every question. So I make it a little easier for them. But that's kind of how a week / chunk of a unit will look.
Gotcha. And Veronica, do you mind if I put you on the spot next? How's your class structured?
I do try to do at least a lab, a unit. I do like starting off with a lab. One reason is so I can discover the concepts, and others we can always refer to it. Oh, remember when we did this? Those types of things. I mean, I'll sprinkle positive physics throughout it. That's the only homework per se I do is positive physics. This is the only thing I feel comfortable like assigning outside of class, and the tutorials, the help they get, everything that goes along with it, I feel comfortable doing outside of class, assigning that. So not too much. I try not to do any homework, but in AP we have to. Regular physics, I try not to do any outside of class, but I am assigning positive physics. So I do 3 quizzes in the unit and 1 exam. And then, yeah, that's a whole thing too. they get to drop their lowest quiz, and then they do better on their test. I let them replace their quiz scores with that. So I keep on emphasizing learning from your mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes, especially at the beginning of the year. It is quite a jump for some kids. I've got a lot of super smart sophomores, or at least for me, super smart sophomores who have never had to lift a finger before. So it's kind of like a new animal for them. So just kind of a little bit more hand holding in the beginning. But yeah, I would love to do more labs because we switched to block last year. I do miss seeing them every day. But yeah.
Gotcha. And can we go Lauren next?
Yeah, so my AP class, I'll be a little bit different here. So my class is considered gradeless at my school, which basically means they get a pass, not pass up until the end of the semester. And then they have to use all of their work for the year to argue for their letter grade at the end of the year. So they have to have all of this evidence and show how they're growing in all the 7 science practices. So with that, each of my assignments each week, I'll have a web assign or 2, a pivot or 2. We're also short on classroom space at our school because we're growing like crazy out here outside San Francisco. And I don't have my own lab room. I don't have a lab in this room. The lab room is another teacher's dedicated classroom. So we do a lot of pivots. I try to get in a few labs each year, but it's challenging with the room sharing. So they'll have a few pivots, 1 or 2 pivots each week, 1 or 2 web assign practice problem sets each week. I don't use positive physics yet in AP Physics C Mechanics for content. But they have ed puzzles, watching the flipping physics videos. My class with the assessments being gradeless, the grade that goes in the grade book is not the grade on the assessment. It's their revision reflection they have to do, go through every single question like you're talking about, learning from their mistakes. Okay, why did you get this question right? Show me the solution. Why did you get it wrong? What mistakes did you make, and how are you going to prevent yourself from making that same mistake again next time? So that's a little different take from my class, but.
Gotcha. Okay. And then Erica?
Yeah, I do a lot of labs. I like hands-on things. I don't really like to do demos for students. I like them to do things. So I try to build lots of different lab activities. I try to build, different stations that they rotate through, and that's my goal this year, is to do more of that. Positive physics, whatever unit we're in, I set it up of what I want them to do, and it's really flexible. So I don't say, okay, I want you to do this section or this section tonight. It's more fluid. They just need to get it complete by the time we get to the assessment. I do quizzes like some of the other people. My tests are always tried to gear it just like the AP tests, where there's a multiple choice section and a free response section. And then just a lot of different things. I have them keep a notebook where there's different things that we're doing that I check off to make sure they've done it for completion. But a lot of it, so it could be, because again, it's also a college and the high school course. I do traditional types of problems as well that aren't just out of positive physics or physics classroom, so out of a textbook.
All right. And then Enrique.
So I for regular physics and AP physics, I'm just using positive physics in the last 4 years. But we usually start with a problem, a question that hopefully is meaningful for the students, and then we explore how we can answer that question. Hopefully that leads to, okay, these are the subjects we need to know in physics, and hopefully that connects to that unit. So we go over that. And then in class, they work on the work section in positive physics, and for AP, most of it is homework. Then they, again, the software shows how they're doing in terms of, it gives me immediate assessment in terms of feedback of their percentage right versus the completion. Then we move on to extra practice. And then I'm only assessing these kids using positive physics semester 1 in AP physics, and then semester 2, again, I switch over to College Board and look at FRQs.
Got it. Perfect. All right. I've got 2 more real quick ones. And so not everybody has to weigh in on this if you don't want. But one thing I know that I did poorly, especially when I was first teaching AP physics, was how do you balance teaching fundamental skills versus practicing with AP style materials? And I know you guys have mentioned like using the AP classroom stuff later, but can anybody jump in and kind of comment on how do you balance those two things?
I can talk a little bit about specifically like an example is proportional reasoning. And so during the free fall units where I really first start touching on it, and I explicitly go through and like teach them, here's what you should be doing to approach a proportional reasoning question. So I have them look at what the value they're looking for is. If it's velocity, how does the velocity change if this is happening? So I say, hey, whatever you're looking for and whatever they're telling you is doubled, you got to find the equation that has those two things, and everything else has to stay the same in that equation. So we have to look for the equation where those two things happen. And then I say, set up that equation. And I walk them through like why it's called proportional reasoning. And so I say like, hey, well, this time it's like this, and the other time it's like double that. So it's this equation over this equation, but the only thing that's changing is 2. So all the other letters are technically canceling out. But to make it faster, I say, write out the equation, replace everything that's not changing with a 1, and then replace the thing that is changing with how much it's changing by, and then do that to it. If it's squared, then square it. So like I explicitly go through that fundamental skill like very clearly every single unit, just to make sure like, hey, we're replacing it with a 1, we're replacing it with a 1, we're doing this. And like that has made a huge difference for those proportional reasoning style questions, because there's no like there's so few calculations on the AP test that has been a huge difference in really explicitly teaching it like that has been really, really helpful for kids.
Gotcha. Yeah. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I'm going to say try not to do all of it at once. There are so many things kids can't do that they need to do. So I try to weave it in each unit. That being said, I will do linearization from the get-go. And also a lot of the labs, I just take old AP questions and make them into labs. And then I add some kind of linearization to it, because the kids, you can teach them how to do it and they still don't get why you'd want to do that. You can tell them, but like, just making it a practice instead of like, oh, we just have to do this. Like, why would you want to do that? But yeah, I think there's so much you got to add and just do a little bit at a time. And I think proportional reasoning, I do agree you have to explicitly teach, but the rest I try to weave in as we go. And not, especially as a new teacher, because it could be, it's already overwhelming. And then there's all these skills that they don't necessarily have that they need. So like, I don't feel like they're ready until March, like the writing piece, how to do all that stuff. I just slowly work in and keep on adding to it as I go.
Got it. Yeah, let me move quickly to my last question because I'm a few questions behind in the chat. But real quick before I get to the questions in the chat, just any tips that maybe you haven't mentioned yet, like things that you learned, have learned from teaching this, or just tips for new teachers in general that you'd wish you had known when you first started teaching AP.
Join the
Use
National
10
AP
for
Physics
gravity.
Teachers Facebook group.
Yes. Use 10 for gravity. Stop using 9.8.
Both good ones. All right, great. Yeah, let me get to some messages that were in the chat. Oh, so one was somebody had a question about diagnostic tests. Do you use a diagnostic test, and if so, kind of what do you use?
I can talk a little bit about a PSAT subscore that we noticed over the years. There's a subscore called Heart of Algebra on the PSAT. And anyone who gets like a 12 or above is usually good to go on the basic skill sets mathematically that they're going to need. And then from a 9 to a 12, you're going to need to give them some extra like focus on some of those basic math skills that, there's a section of positive physics now with that. But if you want to look at their Heart of Algebra score on their PSAT, that one has been a really strong indicator of how much extra practice they need moving forward. I also gave the force concept inventory. They just do so bad on it like every time. So it's not really all that it tells me is they just like don't know anything most of the time. If they get a 50%, I'm like a genius in my class. So it's a good one to just to show their growth. Like it's a good one to use to show growth. And if you have like an SLO in your for your state law stuff, you can definitely use the force concept inventory because they definitely do better the second time around because they fall into every single trap laid by that test. So there's a couple of them.
Yeah, I do an SLO actually my very so I just give them canned data. I ask them to find line of best fit. I ask them to find the slope. I ask them what the slope is and then to predict something with it. I don't give them any instructions, like including scaling the graph, yeah, everything. And I just see where they're at. And I say, just do your best.
Got it. Great. Yeah, so let me move to if anybody wants to add a question in the chat, or if anybody wants to be brave and unmute themselves and ask any questions. I want to open it up to see if anyone in the audience has any questions.
Do you feel this is my first year teaching the course, and when I was at the AP Summer Institute, I was like, oh, it feels like 25% is a lot of time to devote to lab, which is what they say you have to. Do you feel like that? And the person who was teaching the course kind of was like, oh yeah, I really don't do that. Like, and my question is like, do you think that that's like too much, or just your personal opinion, like in terms of doing well on the AP test, is that like an optimal amount, or should it even be more or less?
Labs are I mean, like lab skills you could do every day, right? Like, so that's kind of how I think of it. Like, what's a lab skill? Well, if I make a graph and I need to argue and explain what that graph means, I guess that's technically like a lab skill kind of type of thing. I think it's more focus on um, analyzing data, gathering data. Specifically, they should get comfortable gathering data. But more importantly, they need to be able to kind of like identify what that data means and how they can present that data and use it to make an argument for stuff. So the 25% lab section, I kind of treat a little more like liberally. Like, I don't know, do they consider when I do the when I have them like hold a meter stick and time their reaction time, is that a lab? Because that was more like practice to me, like a practice problem, but it's also them doing something and gathering data at the same time. So little things like that are easy ways to build in that lab component, I think.
I think Andreas, somebody had a quick question for you. Benjamin said, like, how do you get their, I think maybe you said PSAT scores?
Yeah, that depends on the district. We had a program called Unify at the school I used to work at. The school I currently work at, I had to go to my department chair and he sent me a list of everyone's Heart of Algebra scores, but they only had it categorized based on green, yellow, or red. And I just assumed from my memory, like green was like 11 and above or something like that, which is what it generally tends to be, that type of thing. So I don't know what program every district has. In one district I was able to see every single students in my class broken down by their year throughout their entire education. And then district I'm at currently, I have to like go through a bunch of people to get to their test scores. So it just depends on your district, I think. But honestly, if you make the first chunk, if you make the math section of positive physics and assessment, that'll pretty much tell you what you need to know, I would bet.
Gotcha. Any other questions from the audience? Feel free to unmute yourself and just ask. All right. Well, panelists, I guess you covered it all. Thank you so much for everyone for coming out. I'm going to stick around and I was going to do a quick tour of positive physics for starting with like the very basics if people are unfamiliar, but no pressure at all to stay around for that. But yeah, thank you again. to the panelists and for everybody who came out. I really appreciate it. And yeah, hope that a lot of you found this helpful. But yeah, thanks again. I'll stay on. But yeah, feel free to hop off now, and I'll send a recording out afterwards.
Take care, everyone.
Take care, guys. Bye, Jack.
See ya.
Bye, Jack.
All right. If you have stuck around, I was going to go through just a super quick tour of positive physics. Just a heads up, like I built this out of my own classroom. I really want it to help as many people as possible. This is not supposed to be a sales pitch at all. Positive physics, if your school there is a subscription fee because it costs money to develop it. But if your school can't pay for it, we always do pay what you can pricing for any teacher who's paying out of their own pocket, because I really do want it to help as many people as possible. But yeah, if you haven't been there before, I'm going to put the URL in the chat. And yeah, it's completely free to start and even actually use the first 5 units with your students. So definitely give it a shot. But let me log in. I'm going to log into a teacher account and then just show you around real quick. If you have any questions, we have a smaller group now, so please unmute yourself and ask. But yeah, it started as a huge problem bank that I put together for my students. I made some worksheets that worked really well for them, like breaking down problems into bite-sized pieces. It originally started really for lower level students, but it now goes all the way up to AP style questions. I'm going to show you the introduction to forces unit, because I think it really summarizes kind of what we do pretty well. So when a student clicks on these lessons and questions, I'll show you this skill. There's a video, and then it goes into practice problems. There's also a reference sheet that has the equations. You can turn on for your lower level students an extra column that'll show you the manipulated forms of each equation. But let me skip over that and show you kind of what a question looks like. So this is a skill where students are just really getting the fundamentals down, like some of the teachers talked about before, about what net force means. When they practice, I think some people mentioned this, that anything that's in blue is a randomized value. So every student, when two students are sitting next to each other, they can share strategies, but they can't share answers with each other. Students can check their answers at any time. Right answers turn green. Wrong answers turn red, but they can be fixed. And we keep track of how often they get things right, just not caring about the number of attempts, and how often they get things right just on the first try. I highly recommend grading this on completion only. So as we go down the dashboard, the problems get harder and harder. These complete problems are really like standard level, like kind of on grade level physics, but I think it's really valuable even for AP students to do problems like these before they try like the super hard problems. One other quick note is, if you have English language learners, we spend a lot of time making sure that Google Translate doesn't work really well with every site, but it works. We spend a lot of time making sure it works really well with ours. If you have students who need it in Spanish or anything else, it works really well for you there. And then some of the teachers talked about the challenge problems, which are really designed to be kind of AP level questions. The ones that just say challenge are more numerical than you'd find in an AP question, but they're kind of on that level. And then the multiple choice challenge questions are really designed to be specifically like practice AP questions. One thing that's nice about this is that within this skill, it doesn't assume that students have additional knowledge from later in the course. So it can be kind of hard to find questions on AP Classroom that are just focusing on, if your student, in this case, students only have gotten up to like an introduction to forces. All of our multiple choice questions have multiple versions. And so like two students might be sitting next to each other, but they'll see different pictures. So they can discuss the same idea, but they'll have different answers coming from different things. A few teachers mentioned our unit 0. I actually like to start with unit 1, but unit 0 just has these like specific math skills, things like proportional reasoning. I think Andreas talked about this a bit, that he teaches this explicitly, like what would happen if x was divided by 2, what would happen to y? So it would divide by 4 since it's being squared, things like that. There are a few different modes. So extra practice is also a mode that students can study with, or I use that to allow students to study. And then I use this assessment mode to give super randomized assessments. But yeah, the basics of it is it's a huge lesson and video. It's a huge question and video bank. The kind of the big features are it really practices the fundamentals. The numbers are randomized, so students can collaborate without copying, and it gives students instant feedback as they go. I'm going to leave the logistical stuff just to, if you click on the help/FAQs, I had a lot of short videos to like help you add students and things like that. So I won't show you all the logistic stuff yet, but please do just, it's completely free to create an account and explore. And as I mentioned, if you want to use it and your school won't cover the cost, shoot me an email and I can get you the pay what you can option. I know some people who are in this have used that. Mia said, do you set the mode yourself as a teacher? Can students select it to practice themselves? Yeah, so I should make this clear that I'm showing you oops, let me go back to where I was. I'm showing you a teacher account, but this looks almost identical to what a student sees. So a student can flip to the extra practice mode if they need more practice on a particular skill. Mia, did that answer your question? Great. Perfect. Yeah, any other questions? How can I manage 5 different classes? Yeah. So let me show you that real quick. So and it also does explain this. I'm happy to show you, but if you forget any of this, then definitely take a look at the frequently asked questions, and it'll show you how to add class periods and adjust settings. There's a quick video on it right here. But you would go to teacher settings, and you can activate different class periods and you can name them. And then and it'll give you some options. Like if you teach physics, it'll give you some different notations that you can use. Like Andreas recommended, using 10 for gravity. You can set that for each class. You can also set which course they're in, and then even what unit they land on. So I update this throughout the year, so my students log in, they're always landing on the unit that I'm working on. But just make sure, yeah, you set up these different classes, set them to active. For AP classes, set those to advanced. The only difference there is that it requires those challenge questions, but that can be changed anytime. So just make sure before you have your students join that you set your any class period you teach, you set it to active. Is there a pre-made test for each unit? Is it a separate subscription required for chemistry and physics? I'll start with the second question. So no, if you get a teacher subscription, you have full access to all of the courses, and so it just takes one subscription. If your school's paying, it's $399. If you're paying out of your own pocket, you just choose the price. Is there a pre-made test for each unit? Yeah. So let me show you real quick how the assessment works. So the assessment, we designed it to feel really, really fair. So on the homework, students had 11 embedded math questions, 11 free body diagram drawing 1 questions, etc. And what the assessment does is it randomly selects, you can change this value, but by default, it's going to randomly select 2 questions from the embedded math, 2 questions from the free body diagram drawing, etc. So every student is getting questions directly from the homework, but they're different questions for each student. So there's really no surprises, but also really no way for them to cheat. So when they click on this, access assessment, Let me click on restart. Students don't have a restart button, but I was showing this to another teacher. So yeah, this one started with some math questions. You could add more or less. These are some of the free body diagram analysis questions that we looked at earlier. Some of the complete problems towards the end. Yeah, I guess Jay Toller, does that make sense to you? Okay, perfect. And then one other thing while I'm on the assessment, I might as well show you that teachers can still select their answers at any time, or students can still check their answers at any time, but the only difference is if they get something wrong, it locks, and when they're done with the assessment, they'll click finalize, and then they can start making corrections and they'll get a separate correction score. I think a few people just hopped in. If you did, I think our time, we had the time zones off and we were off by an hour, but I will send everybody the recording after that. So my apologies if you just hopped on. I'm sorry that something went, the calendar is supposed to adjust to set it to your local time. But if there was any miscommunication, I apologize for that. And I'll send everyone a recording. This is just the end of it where I was showing some people positive physics, which a lot of the panelists had mentioned that they use. Yeah, any questions on anything before I close this out?
Would you say this works well? Do you teach this with APC mechanics?
Yeah, so we're just starting to add some. So first, I was actually very surprised that a lot of AP mechanics teachers do use the site, even though last year we had no calculus on the site. And so we added these beta calculus problems. You'll see those on the first 3 units. I can't promise when we'll get the rest of the units done. But yes, we have a lot of teachers use the site with APC just to get students, like just to make sure that they really understand what net force means and things like that. But yeah, it doesn't have calculus everywhere yet. It'll definitely have lots of calculus for next year. For this year, it'll kind of be creating it as you go. We also have a feature that Lauren from the panel, she loves the create questions feature, and she was like building a lot of just like calculus practice problems on here. So there's that option as well.
Can the questions you create, can they be like have dynamic parameters?
Oh yeah, I should show you that. Let me show you this real quick, and then I will get to one of the questions that's in the chat. So yeah, when you create a new question. So yeah, we have all the documentation is down here, but basically if I can say a student has a mass of, and I'll put in a variable and then say M, our notation is a random number from 10 to 20. Oh, that's a super low mass, my bad. Let's go 50 to 80 kilograms, and then say what is their weight, and then you could put an answer, and your answer would just be like M times 10. And so yeah, it would be dynamic like that. You can also do like you could add a graph that has I don't know why we'd be plotting their mass times this times sine of X, but it also would be a dynamic graph, so it'd be different for every student. And by the way, creating questions for your students, that's completely free. So there's only a charge if you're using our stuff. Oh yeah, the question, sorry, Ethan, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much. This is an amazing resource. So thank you so much for making it.
Oh yeah.
I love the dynamic parameters. That's great.
Appreciate it. Yeah, honestly, like this is just how I started making my questions for my students, and we're like, oh, if we do some tweaks, we can just make it available to everybody. So yeah. Yeah, and then another question from the chat. Can you print out questions? Yep. So if you go to teacher print work problems, this will print. Sometimes it freezes up when I'm doing a Zoom, but if you click on print, usually you don't need to print everything on there. I get rid of the intermediate skills, but you'll notice like right here, anywhere that there would be a a randomized value. It'll just put it in a blank. And so my students, they have their computer open, they're showing their work on paper. I give them a grade for showing their work on paper, and they're filling in their own numbers as they go. Let me close this because I was printing out way too much stuff, but I think you get the idea of it. Does a subscription exclusively work for one teacher per district? Mia, I'm not sure I fully understand. So generally, like we've had the teachers love the tool, and so they find it, go back to their school, and like our pricing works like by teacher. We haven't had many like big districts purchase the whole thing yet, but we just actually had our first one the other week. So if you think your whole district is interested in it, that'd be awesome. But reach out to me, and then I'll put together like a custom quote because they like that kind of thing.
Okay, so I guess my department head asked whether or not like other science teachers in our department can also have access to the other stuff like chem, environmental science, like all of your other materials.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yes. So first thing, you don't need to pay for the environmental science. It's free. It's under so biology, environmental science, and engineering are actually courses that teachers like Ethan who like to create their own stuff are creating full courses, and then we made those public. But those are free this year because they're not as fleshed out as the physics and the chemistry. If you have a like a chemistry teacher that wants to use the site as well, then when you grab a quote, just make sure that you grab it'll just ask you for how many teachers are using the site, and then the price
Okay.
will be based on the number of teachers.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you everyone for coming. If you ever have any questions about the site or just about physics in general, please reach out to me anytime. My email is right here, and it's my favorite thing to do since I left the classroom is to help other teachers out. And then if you can even schedule a demo and this will just sign you up for 15 more minutes with me. I'm always happy to help and talk about things. But thank you all so much for coming out. I really appreciate it. And yeah, have a good rest of your night.